When the goodness of God seems like it's passed you by, life seems hard to cope. Disappointment, mistakes will come and challenge your faith, and every day will seem like there's no hope. But with Jesus on your side, things will get better. With Jesus on your side, things will get better. So never give up, never give in. He's always on time. Never give up, never give in. The Lord is on your side. Sleepless nights and painful thoughts have left you confused, broken and hurt inside. Unanswered prayers and no one cares have made you feel all alone. With Jesus on your side, things will get better. But with Jesus on your side, things will get better. So never give up, never give in. He's always on time. Never give up, never give in. The Lord is on your side. You
onto our website at igbatt.com, and then once you get there, there's a link and you can go to our new page. We're kind of doing some updates, which, it's still in the works, a work in progress, but we're excited about it. So again, this is It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach. For those who don't know us, we provide information and support while encouraging hope and faith. Myself, and along with other team of advocates. We are a faith-based organization. We believe in Jesus Christ and Him crucified. We believe that He rose from the dead. We believe that He is here to save, heals, and delivers. And we also believe in the Word of God. We believe that Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, will heal and how He chooses to. He will deliver how He chooses to. And it is our job to yield to Him in the way He takes us, not the way we feel that we should go or how things should go. Again, this is It's Getting Better All the Time Mental Health Outreach, providing information and support while encouraging hope and faith. Please log on to our website at www.igbatt.com. You can email us at igbatt1@AOL.com, or go to our website at igbatt.com and hit the link and send us a message. Today, I really wanted to talk specifically to people who either you've been diagnosed with a severe and persistent mental illness, or you are a loved one or a family member of someone with a severe and persistent mental illness. Really want to talk to those two people, you two people today in particular. Of course, this is for anybody, but really particular to these two groups of people. What is a severe and persistent mental illness? Of course, everyone will say, every disease is severe and persistent. But the term severe and persistent mental illness or severe mental illness is actually a term developed by the federal government, and it actually speaks to a certain group of illnesses that are so severe and so persistent that they are long-lasting. They take up all aspects of an individual's life. They tend to not to be sporadic. They tend to, many times start when a person is younger, and then it stays with them all their lives. Sometimes a person might be better, sometimes it might be worse. It comes in episodes. Some people may have to take medications the rest of their lives. Some people may not. Medications may change over time. But when you're talking about severe and persistent mental illnesses, we're talking those illnesses that are so severe that they impact all aspects of an individual's life. What does that mean? In school, you may have challenges in school. You may have challenges in relationships. You may have challenges, just wherever you are. So again, we're talking about severe and persistent mental illnesses. To include, what do those include? The definitions or the diagnosis included in that definition may vary from state to state, but one of the ones that are in all of them, we're talking about schizophrenia. Okay, we're talking bipolar, and when we talked earlier in some of the earlier broadcasts, we talked about the term psychosis, being psychotic. What does that mean? When a person is psychotic or having a psychosis, that means they're out of touch with reality. That's what that means. Psychosis, you're psychotic, you're out of touch with reality. There are several diseases in which a person can be out of touch with reality, or they can be psychotic. The symptoms of several diseases can be psychosis, schizophrenia, bipolar, severe depression, for example. A person can have that psychotic, can be out of touch with reality. So again, psychosis itself is not necessarily this psychotic disorder, but psychosis itself doesn't necessarily mean that the person has schizophrenia or bipolar or anything like that. It can be. So you have psychosis. Let me back up. So the term psychosis, when you hear people on the newscasters saying this person was psychotic, that means they were out of touch with reality. And there could be several reasons or diseases that could contribute to a person being out of touch with reality. Schizophrenia is one of them. Bipolar is one of them. Substance abuse is one of them. So there's a couple of diseases in which that could happen, right? So when you talk about schizophrenia itself is a separate category. It's a diagnosis, right? Schizophrenia, bipolar, severe depression, all of these things when you talk about severe and persistent mental illness. Today I wanted to share a word, persistence. Our word for today is persistence. And I'm taking this from the dictionary online. Firm or obstinate, Oxford dictionaries, give them their credit. Firm or obstinate continuance in a course of action in spite of difficulty or opposition. Firm or obstinate continuance in a course of action in spite of difficulty or opposition. Okay? It is the action or fact of persisting. The quality or state of being persistent. Okay? Is the action or factor of persisting. I think the word that I want to focus on is the continuance in a course of action in spite of difficulty or opposition. When you're living with someone, whether they can be your husband, wife, child, aunt, uncle, or a loved one who is living with a severe and persistent mental illness, or you yourself are living with a severe and persistent mental illness, there comes a point in your illness where you are going to have to be persistent. Okay, you will have to be persistent. And even in your persistence, you may not get the outcome that you expect. Just recently, a friend of mine, her son, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, recently killed himself. He jumped out of a window. And it was really devastating for all of us. But when you look at, and I wish I brought the obituary because I wanted to read it, but this was a young man jumped out of the window. He had been psychotic, out of touch with reality for a while. Okay, now this is why you have to be persistent. You have to be persistent because there is one of the hallmarks or one of the symptoms of a severe and persistent mental illness is that a person doesn't know that they're necessarily sick. Right? They don't necessarily know that they're out of touch with reality in that moment, because in that moment, whatever they're going through is real for them at that moment. So when you talk about one of the symptoms of psychosis or one of the symptoms of a person having schizophrenia, say for example, untreated schizophrenia, is auditory hallucinations. It could be auditory hallucinations or visual hallucinations. Let's just say hallucinations, delusions. Okay? Delusions have to do with the way a person thinks. I always tell people to think about it like this. When you try to figure out what a delusion is, think of the word D, M-I-N-D, mind, just D goes together. Just you attribute it that way. So a delusion, a person have a lot of different types of delusions. Delusion has to do with the way a person thinks, right? I think that I'm married to the president. I think that I am the Queen of England. I think that people are out to get me. I think that, I live a certain place, right? That has to do with the mind, delusions. When you talk about hallucinations have to do with the senses. And there are 5 senses, right? So hallucinations can impact any of those senses, right? A person can have an auditory hallucination where you hear things. You can feel like somebody's crawling on you. You can have tactile. You can have a smell. So when you're talking about psychosis, one of the hallmarks or the symptom of psychosis is an auditory hallucinations or delusions, not necessarily auditory, even though auditories tend to be more common, but hallucinations or delusions, right? So when a person is in the midst of their psychosis, whatever the cause of the psychosis, whether it was because of schizophrenia, whether because of a drug that they took, or bipolar, whatever it is, or even a disease, okay? At that moment, they're out of touch with reality. They are not reasoning with you. They're not seeing things the way you see things, right? And so think about it. If I think that people are out to get me, or if I think that I really have an urgent message for the president and I must go to tell him this, no one is going to stop me, because in my mind I must go tell the president this particular message. No one is going to stop me. So you trying to reason with me in the midst of my psychosis is not going to help any of us, because it's not going to work, because I'm not going to believe you. I'm going to know I need to talk to the president because I have a message for him, right? So when you looking at untreated mental illnesses, so when you talk about untreated mental illnesses, because mental illnesses are treatable with the right medications, with the right treatment. These illnesses, just like any other disease, can be treated. It can be treated to the point where a person may not have any symptoms, a little symptoms, or sporadic symptoms, or they might have cycles, or they may live with them the rest of their lives, but it'll be manageable. Well, a lot of times when people tell me, when it comes to taking their medications, for example, they'll say that the voices may be like at a murmur or like at a whisper, or they come and go, particularly when a person is under stress. So anyway, but persistence. Now I want to stay with that particular word for a minute. We have to be persistent, because when you're dealing with someone who in the middle of their psychosis or psychotic episode, part of the symptoms of being psychotic, or one of the symptoms, is not necessarily thinking that you're sick. It's not about being stubborn. It's not about the person just doesn't, see it your way. They really don't believe it. And there's a word that I'm going to share that I can never pronounce it, but I'm going to share it as it goes on, because there's actually a term for it when a person doesn't feel that they need to take their medications. If you go on my website, igbatt.com, you should be able to find it, a whole article there. But so again, they don't believe that they need to take medication. That's when you, as a loved one, as the friend, as a concerned citizen, or whatever the case is, when you're going to have to step in and help. I always say it like this: if a person was bleeding on the street, your loved one was bleeding on the street, you just walk away, unless it was if it was in fact a loved one, somebody that you really loved. You wouldn't really just walk away, right? You would kind of I wanted to look up something real share with you. You wouldn't just walk away. You would do something about it. So what happens is, when a person's in a psychotic episode, sometimes we just walk away. We think the person is reasoning the way we're reasoning. Oh, well, if they wanted treatment, they'll get treatment. They're not bothering anybody. So we walk past our family and friends. We're not persistent until things get really bad. And you've heard me say over and over again that if your loved one requires police involvement, then the system has failed. Right? I've said this over and over again, and I certainly believe that, because what you're saying is that things have gotten so bad that no one has not paid any attention, that this person has not been in treatment, something failed, something didn't go right, that the police are the first responders. The police should not have to come to respond to a crisis, a psychiatric emergency. Right? Especially when you talk about a person who's been diagnosed with an illness for a long period of time. It's just like if you had what do you call it, hypertension, or what is it, diabetes. You know you have diabetes. You have to manage your symptoms. You have to take, I see some people have juice and some people have peppermints, whatever it is that you have to have, and you have to take your medications on a regular basis. You manage it. Well, just like you manage your diabetes, you have to manage your mental health symptoms. If you have diabetes and the paramedics have to show up to your house, they're usually showing up because maybe you didn't take your medication on time, or you didn't eat when you were supposed to. It's something that went wrong, or maybe you might need a medication adjustment. It's the same thing there when you're talking about when a person with a mental illness. Before a person has a psychotic episode, unless you're talking about maybe something related to substance where it was immediate or something like that. But before a person has a psychotic episode or a person has a relapse, there's a period of time. There are signs and symptoms that indicate that this person was going towards a relapse. So the question was, were we persistent? What did we do? So we have to be persistent. So going back to my friend and her son, a sweet kid, just a sweet kid, it is 24. With him, it was one of these things where he didn't necessarily feel like he needed help. He didn't necessarily feel like he was sick. And the further he got into his psychosis, the more and more he believed that. And it was hard. It was hard to get him into treatment. His mother had to be persistent, right? Had to take him, had to make the phone calls, had to do things even when he didn't feel like it. Now, there are a lot of things that's right without the mental health system in America, but there are a lot of things that could be better. I'm not going to say that could be wrong, but there's a lot of things that's wrong that could be better. Let me say that. One of the things that can be better, I think, is just when we're looking at severe and persistent mental illnesses, is getting a person into treatment. Can be difficult depending on where you live and the symptoms that the person presents with. You have to you have to be very shrewd in a sense if you have a loved one that needs treatment. Because depending on where you are, depending on the symptoms, it can be really difficult to get them in. Unfortunately, many times a person has to have a psychotic episode, or they have to have a police involvement before they can get the help that they need. And even then, it may just be short term, which is why the people who around this individual have to be persistent. You have to be persistent and say no. Whoever you got to call, if you got to call 100 times, if you have to be a pain in somebody's neck, so to speak, you need to do that. Because each life is precious. We want to make sure that individuals who are living with severe mental illnesses get the treatment that they need, because treatment works. We want to decrease the number of times that a person dies by suicide. The number of times that a person gets to the point where they take their life by suicide. This young man, because of and not just him, unfortunately, others like him, because of their voices, because of what's going on, the psychosis, they don't even know that they're taking their life. Right? It wasn't even a conscious decision. Sometimes it's just they don't know. They don't know that at that moment that if you keep taking a nail and poking it in your eye, or keep doing this with the right vein, that you could die. Because at that moment they're so out of touch with reality. So when we talk about us from a faith-based perspective, the scripture talks about the strong must bear the infirmity of the weak. So when you look at it from the spiritual standpoint, one of the prayers that as we pray for our families, our children, our husband, our wife, the nations, pray for those who in that very moment who don't have the mental capacity to pray for themselves, who don't have the mental capacity to think for themselves, who don't have the mental capacity to determine right from wrong. At that moment, when we talk about dying by suicide, right now, I'm not necessarily talking to those who are depressed at that moment, because at that moment, when you talk about dying by suicide, at that moment, they don't see no other option. They see no other choice. At that moment, that is the best thing for them to do at that particular moment. But when you talk about someone with a psychotic, who is psychotic or out of touch with reality, whether that's because of schizophrenia or whether that's because of bipolar or a drug of a substance issue, at that moment it's not rational. They're not even there. At that moment, they don't see how if you keep walking on, keep walking, that the ledge is going to give way, that at some point you're going to run out of ledge and you're going to fall and hit the ground at that moment. So we have to pray. The strong have to bear the infirmity of the weak. Lord, look on those at this very moment don't have the wherewithal to know, okay, what's right from wrong. Who at that moment, because of the symptoms that they're dealing with, they are so engrossed with their symptoms that they don't see the reality. There is this little skit, little exercise that you can do, because some of you may say, well, at that very moment they should know at the very moment about, the Lord would have done this or whatever. There's a skit. I would encourage you to kind of do it with a couple of friends. 3 of you get into a group, right? And what you want to do, 2 of you start having just a regular conversation, okay, whatever, just have your regular conversation, and then have the 3rd person get in the ear of someone while you're talking, and as you're talking and having a conversation, that 3rd person just start while the 2 of you are trying to talk. I'm telling you, I think there's maybe something on YouTube you can look at as well. It'll be an eye-opener, because what's going to happen when the 2 of you are talking and that 3rd person is just talking in your ear, that's what it's like when you're dealing with psychosis, when you're out of touch with reality, right? And when you're talking, you're going to get irritated. If you do the exercise long enough, some people, when we've done this exercise, they've just gotten really bothered. I mean, it was really like they were really something just came over them and they were just angry. They were just, triggered because of that noise in your ear. Imagine that those voices just going on in your ear. I'm trying to talk. I'm talking to you. How everybody doing? And the voice say, don't listen. And, you know what I'm saying? So it can try it. Get 3 of you in a group and try it, and you'll see a little bit of what it's like to live every day with voices in your head. And we're not talking about the thoughts that all of us have. We're talking about extraordinary. We're talking about these voices that are in your head that's heightened, that's beyond the regular voices that just keep going on, or you can hear. It is irritating. It will drive you to do certain things. So when you come upon, when a person's dealing with psychosis or psychotic, at that moment, they're hearing, they're attuned to what's going on in their head. So think about it. If I think that you're out to get me, I'm going to respond accordingly. So many times a person who is out of touch with reality, they are more a danger to themselves than they are to other people. Now, we hear the statistics. We hear it on the news. You hear something about a person who's psychotic, maybe kills someone or does something, and that does happen. But the data lets us know that people with psychosis, they're more inclined to be the victims as opposed to the other way around. But again, persistence, okay? It's really important that as a family member, let's start there, that when you're trying to get your loved one help, that you're persistent. That you're persistent, that you know what the resources are in your area. Even if you a friend, you want to know the resources in the area. If you have a crisis team, you want to know the number to the crisis team. You would like to know their doctor, their treatment team, where do they go with medications. You want to know as much as you can about your loved one's illness. You want to have a conversation with your loved one. Don't think just because they may not seem like they're listening that they're not listening, but they are. Because remember what I said about the voices. So sometimes it's like a delayed reaction. So if you're talking to me and I have somebody else in my head talking, it may be a few days later that I've processed everything that you said, and I come back to you and I'll say, hey, you remember when you and I, we were talking about A, B, or C? And then you're like, that was 2 days ago. Because it takes that long to process the information. Right? So sometimes you think about a person may respond. When we talk about schizophrenia, they may respond a little slow, right? They may respond a little delayed, and you may be thinking, okay, they don't get it. No, they get it. It takes time. When there's a lot going on in your head, it takes time to process all that information. But again, persistence. The word is persistence. I asked a friend of mine, one of my partners that does this with me, Minister Kelly, and I said, what would you say to family members? Right, because of her husband, and he said you got to be persistent. You have to be persistent in prayer. You have to be persistent in taking care of your own self, because it can wear on you. So if you a family member, a loved one, you have to be persistent in taking care of yourself as well. I would encourage you to make sure that you get your loved one connected with other resources so you won't be totally drained. But you have to be persistent. You can't let the fact that a person doesn't want treatment detour you. It may slow you down. You may have to wait a while, but don't let it detour you. Because what happens is the person doesn't want help. They refuse it. And the doctors, the police, the authorities, they may not necessarily be really helpful to you at that moment, because they'll say, well, if the person